Hello, everyone. Welcome to special event, Eat, Drink, and Prosper Together, a virtual series on Chinese cuisine. The first segment that's brought to you through a collaboration with U.S. Heartland China Association, Tennis Work, and our friends and teachers at Iowa Culinary Institute in the Des Moines Area Community College. And my name is Min Fan. I'm the executive director of the U.S. Heartland China Association. We're a 501c3 nonprofit and focus on building bridges between the Heartland region and China. And I had the fortune to visit DMAC, Des Moines Area Community College, in the spring and visit with Chef Andre in a one facility where I learned about their long history of training their students in the French cuisine. It dawned on me that Iowa, given its long history of friendship with China, which is its #1 agriculture export customer, and maybe they would be interested in teaching the Chinese cuisine. That was how this idea was initially born. And then when I met with Lulu, our dear friend at Tennessee China Network, and she's like, oh, I already got a name for it. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Tennessee China Network's Executive Director, Lulu, and to lead us through this very unique program. One last thing is that we have 2 rooms full of students at DMAC, and you're in for a treat. Thank you again for joining us today. Lulu, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ming. So Tennessee China Network is also a nonprofit. We connect people and business with Chinese focus across Tennessee, but we also extend our friendship to the U.S. Heartland, and thanks to U.S. Heartland China Association, this program was born. A lot of collaboration over the months, or maybe extending into almost a year now. So this is our agenda. We're going to have a presentation from Chef Eric Stein, and then a demo from Brandon Lin, and then we'll have Q&A after presentation and demo. So please enter all your questions into chat. And do not want to take too much time because I think the presentation and demo is the more exciting part. I will type in Eric's LinkedIn profile in the chat as well. But Eric has a lot of experience as a chef, as a teacher, and also an author. And he'll be sharing with us on the regional cuisines of China. We also have education partners in the room that Ming mentioned, and their students. Okay, Eric, now it's yours.
Thanks so much, Lulu. Great. So, hey there. Yeah, as Lulu introduced me, Chef Eric Stein. So I am the chef for Church's Texas Chicken International, and so oversee the research and development for a global fried chicken chain. If you're familiar with Church's Chicken up in Iowa, in the US, we have about 800 restaurants, and then internationally in 3 regions, the Middle East, Asia, and the Americas, we have an additional 700 restaurants. And so my role is research and development for the international markets there. And so starting up one of our newer markets, everyone's exploring, Popeyes explores, Dairy Queen is very well versed in China. And so I've been doing a lot of research on Chinese cuisine, and I learned a lot through this process too, of doing this demonstration for you all today. And so what I'm going to talk to you today about is regional Chinese cuisines. And so when we think of just Asian cuisine or Chinese cuisine in general, we think of a very fundamental flavor profile, right? You probably think about soy sauce, you think about rice noodles, maybe some Americanized Chinese dishes such as General Tso's chicken, sweet and sour chicken. But I want to open your eyes to the depth and really the interesting facts about some of the regional Chinese cuisines and some of the regional Chinese ingredients that are out there. And so kind of starting off, I mentioned General Tso's chicken, but what we know of General Tso's chicken actually was a real dish in China, but it looks very, very different than it does in the United States. And so one of the things I want you to take away from my presentation for you all today is the understanding that we have a different palate in the US than they do in China. And some of the dishes that we know look very, very different actually if they're prepared in authentic Chinese restaurants or if you went to China. I had a really amazing experience about a month ago. I was in Malaysia and went to a Hong Kong style restaurant and a kind of dinner that I'd never experienced before with some of the really intricate preparations and presentations of dishes. It was about 8 courses of really unique and simple Chinese dishes, but very, very, very flavorful. And so one of the takeaways I'd like you to get today is look at some of the Chinese dishes that I'm explaining here to you. I'm just going to do an overview, but really go in and do the research further on yourselves if it's something you're interested in some of these cuisines. And so I want to start off is what influences a cuisine. This is true not just for Chinese cuisine, but really global cuisines in general, right? Is what's the history, what has been the evolution of the country or region that you're looking at. And so to take it away from China and really even to like Thailand, right? So when we think of Thai cuisine, we think of pad Thai, but without the influence of the Portuguese, pad Thai wouldn't exist in the way that we have it now. And so just because something starts off in one way, it really, really evolves. I put imperialism in here. This is just something that you kind of want to know in the background. I'm not going to go through 5,000 years of Chinese emperors and rule, but it definitely did make influence on cuisine. Even to yesterday, I had a dish called Empress Chicken. And so it's something I'm going to just touch on Empress Chicken, but something that you can go look in a little bit further and what makes that Empress Chicken different than General Tso's chicken, because they're very, very similar, but a little bit of differences in there. One thing I'll touch on throughout my presentation is climate and geography. And this is something that even if you think about the cuisine in Des Moines, Iowa, how local corn, local agriculture influences the cuisine that you eat there. And the same is true for any place in the world, right? The geography and the agriculture are really going to influence the things you eat. Access to food. So access to food, the crops, the seafood, the cattle, if it's a landlocked place versus if it's on the coast, if it's close to a river, if it's mountainous, these are all things that are going to influence the way that people eat. Eating habits and culture, right? So I'm going to go a little bit onto that, but really if you think about religious beliefs, right? And so Buddhism within Chinese cuisine, you're going to see a lot more vegetarian. And so areas of China where there's more of Buddhism as a practice religion, you'll see more vegetarianism. There actually is some Muslim religion in China. And so through that, you'll see the influence of halal on the cuisine. And then isolation versus sophistication. That can kind of be summed up in how modernized the cuisine is. Are you eating things because they're available? You know, frogs, turtles, things that are in the rice plant, the rice fields, versus if it's a sophisticated area like a city like Hong Kong, you're going to see a lot more pork, barbecues, and things that are agriculture influences versus things that are readily available. So this here is kind of a snapshot of the presentation that I'm going to present today, right? So 8 distinctive cuisines of China. And so there's 4 of these that are the building block of Chinese cuisine, and the 4 of these cuisines that have come in a little bit later. And so we're going to talk about all 8 of these, and then we're going to wrap up with the most modernized, and then coming into how that has influenced some of the things that we're eating that Brandon's going to follow up on with noodles and bao and dumplings. So kind of the pantry staples, like I mentioned, you know, soy sauce, oyster sauce, fermented chili paste. Really another interesting story is if you read around the history of oyster sauce, right, and how that came to be. And if you're familiar with a company called Lee Kum Kee, the founder was the first one to make oyster sauce. And so how he stumbled upon oyster sauce, and then now how it's really, really prevalent in a lot of Chinese dishes. toasted sesame oil, that flavor of toasted sesame versus a raw sesame oil. Another thing around global cuisines, not just to take it away from Chinese, but the same basic ingredient used differently or can really influence the cuisine. If you look at the cuisines of India versus Morocco, right, those spices that are really known in both, one has a toasted spice, one has a non-toasted spice. And so if you look at sesame oil, the fact that toasting sesame oil really gives it a more fragrant aroma and flavor versus an untoasted sesame oil in noodle dishes. Black vinegar, one of my favorite ingredients. And so we'll talk about black vinegar in dipping sauces, but really how it's much different than, you know, some of your other vinegars out there. So the white wine of China is a cooking wine that we'll talk about in one of the regions. Hoisin sauce, peanut oil, cornstarch, green onions, ginger, scallions, and rice. These are just basic ingredients you're going to see throughout the cuisines, right? So these are your pantry staples. One note on soy sauce, not all soy sauces are created equal. This is just a small snapshot of soy sauce, but if you go to I really challenge you to go to some Asian grocery stores and look at the soy sauces that are on the shelves there, because they are not all created equal. Some are higher in sodium, some are lower in sodium. As you can see here in my notes, light doesn't mean lighter for you or less sodium. It's just the fermenting time and the flavor of those soy sauces. So dark soy sauce versus light soy sauce, and then just some additionals. Sweet soy sauce, ketchup mayonnaise is another one of my favorite ingredients, is a sweetened, really reduced. If you think about, I liken it to balsamic vinegar. So in aged balsamic vinegar, you're reducing the water content and strengthening the flavor and the sugars. And so that's where you see that sweet soy sauce, a double fermented soy sauce. A little note on that, right now it's at a premium, and so you can't find double fermented soy sauce on the grocery store shelves right now. Black soy sauce, so again with black soy sauce and black vinegar, and then sweetened soy sauce. This one is particularly used in seafood dishes, and so you might actually have fish sauce combined with soy sauce, and so that would be for seafood dishes is a seasoned soy sauce. Lucky for me, I get to start with my favorite flavors of China in Szechuan cuisine. So I like it hot and spicy, lots of chilies, lots of garlic, lots of onions. To take a quick step back for a second and talking about the cuisines of Asia in general. So Chinese cuisine is really the father cuisine of Asia, right? So I liken Japanese cuisine and Chinese cuisine as the mother and father cuisines of all of Asia and the influence that you see. Korea is the rebellious stepchild of Asian cuisine, in my opinion. But you'll see these here. So the really strong, bold flavors, wok cookery, fast and furious cooking methods, lots and lots of strong flavors. And so Szechuan cuisine is a great example of where to start. As I mentioned, the Szechuan chilies. So Szechuan peppercorns, known as prickly ash. So you might see it labeled as prickly ash. This is what gives your taste buds a tingle when you eat Szechuan cuisine. And so Szechuan cuisine is known for these things, hot and spicy, Szechuan peppercorns, and then mouth-numbing chili oil. So as we dive deeper into Szechuan cuisine, again, taking into consideration some of the things I mentioned around where the area in the country is, what the agriculture is like, what's the growing season, you see that you have the influence of rivers, and so there is seafood in Szechuan cuisine, but also mountainous terrain, and so really good for growing chilies. And then your two cuisines that are going to come out of Szechuan, Chengdu cuisine and Mala cuisines. And so this is really what you see here is the platform that I'm going to show you these cuisines. So a little bit of introduction, the three basic things that you want to know about the cuisine, kind of the areas where it's located, and then digging deep into the best part, right? The food. And so if you look at four dishes that I named here, Kung Pao chicken, right? You might have seen Kung Pao chicken on Chinese food restaurant menus here. But like I said, you're going to see a little bit different cuisine in China than you are in the US. And so the Kung Pao version in China is going to be lots of red chilies. And so you can see it here on the right. Mei Pao tofu, or Mei Pao tofu, as it's sometimes pronounced, is a pork heavy sauce with lots of chilies that then you cook diced tofu into. Very, very, very signature dish of Szechuan cuisine. Dan Dan noodles, one of my favorite dishes. Noodles, again with the ground pork, the Szechuan chili oil, the mala spices, and then hot pot. One note on mala, right? If it's not, it's like I liken to Nashville hot chicken. If Nashville hot chicken doesn't make your face melt off, they didn't do it right. It's the same with mala. If you're not drooling, and that's what it's simply, sometimes you see on Szechuan restaurants, salivary chicken or saliva chicken. And so under the mala, cold chicken. So if it's not making you mouth water and your eyes tingle, then it wasn't done right. Very, very spicy cuisine. All right, Anhu cuisine. So again, talking about the regions, you can see it's landlocked here. Game and foraged ingredients. This one's really, really interesting because of the use of game, the use of the fruits of the forest, mushrooms, asparagus, some, well, I mentioned mushrooms, but different types of fungi. You're going to want to really focus on fresh flavors. And so while it's the fruits of the forest, care is taken to preserve the natural flavor. And you're going to see that through multiple cuisines that I'm going to talk about, and then natural and dietetic cuisine. And so the ingredients of the cuisine really are food as medicine is the base thing you want to think about in this type of cuisine here. So East Central region of China, here are the provinces. I'm not going to butcher all of these names because definitely I would butcher the names more so than some of our other presenters here. Keep in mind the base of the Yellow Mountain, one of the signature dishes is going to be Yellow Mountain chicken that I'll talk about in a second. And then again, as I mentioned, wild ingredients. So probably the biggest thing you want to remember out of this cuisine, out of Hu cuisine, is wild ingredients, right? And so I have a picture here of a braised chicken and turtles. And so as I mentioned, it's the foods that are locally available, right? If you're landlocked or mountainous or rivers, it's going to be the foods that are available to you. And we're talking again about the traditional types of these cuisines, not necessarily the modernized functions. And so these are really the historic parts of how Chinese cuisine kind of evolved over the past 5,000 years. So Brandon and I had a very animated conversation around hairy tofu. Again, there's lots of cool videos around hairy tofu. It's like the blue cheese of tofu, right? And so it's inoculated with fungus that's allowed to grow and ferment. And then it's actually sold by the street vendors in the region. And so lots of fun stuff you can see about hairy tofu. Stewed bamboo shoots. One of the things I mentioned that's very, very important to Chinese cuisine is a presentation, right? If you think about serving bamboo shoots as a side dish, this could very easily be piled up on the side. But you see how these are nice and sliced and shingled to create the presentation here. Stinky mandarin fish. And so there's lots of great stories around how fish came to this landlocked area in barrels. The stinky doesn't actually refer to the fish itself, it refers to the sauce. And so in this instance, stinky mandarin fish is actually garlic, is the stinky essence or aroma of this fish dish. And then Yellow Mountain stewed pigeon, probably the most famous dish out of the region. You can see here, these are called wolfberries. And so going back to that dietetic or food as medicine aspect of the cuisine, this is really summed up in this dish here. Shandong cuisine, strong flavors, again, savory focus, lots of umami. And then this one here has the most abundant cooking techniques. You can see here braised, steamed, stuffed, braised, soup. This is what is known as the heart of the north. This is really interesting because this braised intestines and brown sauce is the same picture here, but a little bit of care for presentation, right? And how appetizing, you can see how well glazed that pork intestine is. But again, using all of the animal, and this is the premiere of the 8 culinary traditions of Chinese cuisine. This is another really interesting thing. There's so many cool things to pull out of learning about the cuisine. And so Kong Family Feast is actually banquet style, right? And so this area is known for this banquet style food, and something that there's banquet style menus, and actually something that's starting to grow in popularity here in the US is this banquet style of Chinese, more so than the banquets of the Lazy Susan and egg rolls and wonton soup, but actually a historical reference to the empire cuisine and banquets of the emperors of China. So what to try from this cuisine? Sweet and sour carp. So this is actually what's known as pine cone fish or the cutting technique as pine cone style, right? And so it's really intricate cutting and then flash fried with sweet and sour sauce, steamed stuffed tofu. And so a dual cooking technique, a combination there of steaming and then braising. And then bird's nest and clear soup. Another one that's really cool videos that you can find on YouTube of bird's nest soup and how they harvest a bird's nest, why it's expensive. It's actually the saliva of the birds that flavors the soup or creates the nest. All right, continuing to move along. Again, not going to butcher the cuisine here, but rich umami taste, focus on flavor and preservation, braising, simmering, and stewing techniques. One of my favorite here is lion head meatballs. So they get their name from their size. They're as big as a lion's head. And so they're actually a braised meatball. And then I get to talk about one of my favorite things, some soup dumplings. And so we'll move soup dumplings. I'll give all the presentation there to Brandon, but soup dumplings is another awesome ingredient, another awesome dish that's starting to gain popularity in the US. And there's so many cool restaurants and combinations of flavors as a platform from soup dumplings. So as opposed to seafood from the sea, you see a lot more river fishes in this cuisine, and then the art of knife work, right? So when you see carrot, swans, and all these beautiful things that are intricate as garnishes in Chinese cuisine, it's from the knife work of this region of Sioux cuisine. Red braised pork ribs. And so red braised pork ribs is braised in soy sauce and black vinegar. That's what makes that red sauce. Beggar's chicken, kind of a cool story there of how it was originally cooked in the earth in mud, and then moving it from cooking in mud to wrapping it in banana leaves or lotus leaves to roasting it or steaming it. Salted duck, and then as we mentioned, some delicious soup dumplings there. All right. Zhejiang cuisine, so fresh, light taste. Again, as I mentioned many times, focus on the flavor preservation. So this one really, while we talk in stark comparison to Szechuan cuisine, you see avoid spicy seasonings and thick sauces. And so the flavors here really, really shine through. And so while there are sauces, I'm going to show some examples. So the fish and vinegar sauce, the fish is cooked separately from the vinegar sauce. And so the vinegar sauce is just an accent. And so the flavors really come together and marry well from this cuisine. Kind of a cool dish I'll talk about is the prawns with tea leaves. And so elegant dishes, poets, and lush tea fields really influence the cuisine from this region. And then food reflects the fertility of the province and closeness to the sea. I mentioned the Chinese white wine, and so comes from this region here. And so has moved throughout Chinese cuisine, but really the cooking with wine and cooking with tea, the influence comes from this cuisine here. And so dango pork is generally pork bellies, can be pork knuckles. I've had it before. Very similar to your red cooked pork. And so you'll see here the red cooked pork, dango pork, and then when we talk about char siu barbecue, very, very similar in the cuisine, in the dishes, but a little bit of differences based on the region. Shrimp stir fried with tea leaves here, I mentioned, probably one of the most famous dishes to come out of Z cuisine. Steamed fish with vinegar sauce, as I mentioned, and then sweet and sour glazed lotus roots. And so if you look at all of these dishes here, really, you see the freshness of flavor in these images. And so probably the heaviest one here would be the glaze on the sauce here, where it's cooked in there, but you get the crispness from the lotus. All right, Fujian cuisine, again, focused on delicate, savory flavors. So here you're gonna see your influence of cooking in wine and pickling. A little bit longer explanations here, and so I'm hoping you'll get your slideshow so you can read all of the things here. But Min cuisine is probably one of the biggest things that is the alternative name for this cuisine here. Characterized again by wild foods from the mountain, great seafood, and generally sweet and light flavors. So you have here, I put in the cuisine has subcategories. And so while you have your main category of Min cuisine, you have kind of like your east, south, north, south, east, and west of the cuisine as well. So this cuisine here is the focus on the longevity of cooking, right? Cooking as an art form. And so we mentioned, well, in our previous call, we talked about Buddha jumps over the wall. And so this is a very, very elaborate, kind of expensive dish because it utilizes abalone. It can have shark fin. It's a seafood dish. I talked about the vegetarian influence of Buddhism. And so that's where the name Buddha jumps over the wall comes from, is actually the story around Buddha jumping over the wall to leave to go to be able to eat seafood because he was a vegetarian. So kind of interesting names for some of the dishes here. Oyster pancakes, a delicious oyster pancake, sometimes with vinegar, sometimes with oyster sauce. You can see the oyster sauce back there. I mentioned the influence of cooking, and so chicken braised in red wine, much different than your coq au vin that I'm sure your instructors have had you made or you've eaten many times in the dining room in your school. And then these fish balls, there's actually a rice flour or potato flour wrapping around a meatball, a seafood meatball, and then they're steamed, right? So lots of combination cooking in Chinese cuisine. Hunan, we're starting to move around. So we have two cuisines left here. Hunan, probably the most popular cuisine of China within China, right? There's a lot of influence of Hunan cuisine throughout the rest of some of the other Chinese cuisines. One of the original 4 traditional cuisines of China. Aromatic flavors, chilies and garlic, and then fermented foods at every meal. So if you've ever gone to a Hong Kong style barbecue, you'll see the pickled greens or fermented foods that come with it. So that's a great example of getting a fermented food with every dish. Kind of a fun picture I included here is actually, I think it was called Dragon Meets Phoenix, or was that what it was? Dragon Meets Phoenix. Brandon's not in his head, so I'm guessing I got the name right.
It is.
Yeah, and so it's actually a snake and a wild cat dish. But you can see the nature made to preserve the flavors and a really cool presentation, some cilantro on there. Again, your red chilies. And then one of the things here, if it doesn't count as red chili, if there's no red chili, it doesn't count as a meal. Again, similar to Szechuan cuisine, and if you go back to the map, you'll see Szechuan cuisine and Hunan cuisine are not all that far off. And so there are some crossover of the cuisines there. Steamed tofu with chopped chili, very, very, again, you see a lot of the layering, slicing, shingling, and layering as part of the presentation. Another hugely famous dish to leave China is Chairman Mao's red braised pork belly. And so as I mentioned, the dango pork, red braised pork ribs, the pork belly, red braised pork belly here. You can see how this dish has kind of like taken on its own regional influences. And that's something that you'll definitely find with a lot of Chinese cuisine is the regional influences based on the ingredients. As I mentioned, preservation is a huge part of this cuisine. And so steamed preserved meat. And so it is actually meat that's salted, cured, or otherly preserved, and then cooked again, and then presented together. And then you have your Dongan chicken here. All right, Cantonese cuisine, moving kind of to the end here. Cantonese, probably the most recognized Chinese cuisine of the world. If you go to Americanized Chinese restaurants, a lot of the restaurant menus are going to be influenced by Cantonese cuisine. For myself, when I think of Hong Kong barbecue, right, I think of things that come, the restaurants that are located with that as Cantonese. When I think of Cantonese cuisine, I think of one of my favorite styles of food. And so dim sum. If you're not familiar with dim sum, it's small bites, similar to Spanish tapas in the fact that you don't get large dishes, but multiple smaller dishes. In stark contrast to tapas, lots of bold flavors, lots of cooking techniques, some really interesting things, but noodles, dumplings, stuffed shrimp balls, wontons, noodle dishes. One of my favorites is black bean braised beef ribs. And then I only included 3 here in Cantonese, but the Hong Kong style barbecue, if you see the meats hanging in the window, generally red cooking, and so marinated or brushed with a soy sauce, sugar, vinegar glaze. Dim sum, so again, small bites. Your egg tarts, really interesting story about how the egg tarts came to be famous in China. You have your fried bean curd, and so when you make tofu, you have a skin on the top that forms called yuba, and so they use that skin to wrap foods and then deep fry. You have your sesame balls, lots of interesting things that go along with dim sum, and then ending up with steam bao. And now, as just like soy sauce, not all bao are created equal, and so all of these fall under the category of a steamed bun, but based on the different region, you're going to have different influences. And so Hong Kong style barbecue pork buns, Shanghai style steamed soup buns or soup dumplings, and then a Taiwanese bun. And so this bread here is called mantao. And so that's the form of all of these buns is actually based on this bread here. And so here this looks like it might be duck or pork belly with the pickled greens. So I know that was a fast and furious overview of the cuisines of China, but hopefully I gave you some thought starters here. You can see myself, that's my Bitmoji and how much I love dim sum. Actually went for dim sum on Friday night. And so feel free to reach out if there's any questions. I look forward to our Q&A at the end of this, but I'm gonna pass the chopsticks over to Brandon.
Thank you, Eric. I gotta say, that was a great overview. I'm so hungry right now, just looking at all these food. I'm sure everybody else is. Yeah. My name is Brandon Lin. I'm the founder and CEO of a restaurant concept called Stein Boys. We're based in Nashville, Tennessee, and today I will be giving a small demo of a dish called beef noodle soup. But before I do that, I would like Jason, if he could play a video of what the Stein Boy is about. This way, you guys can kind of get a small introduction of how I got into this business and what our mission statement is, and what my passion is to do this. So Eric, you gotta come visit Nashville sometime. I can take you out to get some real Nashville hot chicken. I know you're pretty
Hey, I started at Prince's, man. Prince's they laughed at me when I showed up and I said, I'll take the extra hot. And then these guys chuckled and I cried.
Yeah, the Prince is hot. Yeah, we have a stall right next to Prince's. You might see in the video too. We're located right next to Prince's in the Simply Food Hall in downtown. Well, I want to kind of mention a couple things. I know I have my business partner. He unfortunately had a flight delay, but he will be answering some of the Q&As later after I give the demonstration. And so what I'm gonna be talking about is the making. Well, there's so many dishes that Eric had brought up earlier, and it's just, it would be too crazy to go over every single one of them. And when we opened our restaurant, even we had to really pick a couple of dishes that we thought that could really appeal to the American palate, but at the same time stay true to his authenticity in the Chinese region. So when my partner and I were traveling across China, we came across a couple of dishes. One of them being the beef noodle soup. That is a dish that most Chinese people will start their morning with. Well, there's depending on the region, but there's the bao, which is like a fluffy type of bun, like a flour with fillings, meat fillings inside, typically pork. but like we have a demonstration of a beef noodle soup that I will be talking about after Jason shows the video.
This is your local Bao restaurant. For 3 years, we have been supplying fast casual Chinese food, and now we want to officially introduce the team behind the concept for the first time.
With diversity at its core, Stein Boys was founded by a group of friends with different backgrounds ranging from healthcare, business management, marketing, and financial services.
The team brings the experience and pleasure of having traditional Chinese comfort food to Nashville.
We train extensively in China to learn, hone, and teach the skills of hand making our food in the US.
If we weren't looking for this type of food ourselves, we would not have seen the opportunity to bring a unique dining experience to Nashville. With a focus on authentic, fresh, daily made bao buns, dumplings, and soups, we invite guests and staff alike to explore a world that is more than an ocean away.
What has really motivated us has been the overwhelming amount of support we've received from both locals and visitors, seeking a way to tease their taste buds with rich cultural flavors. And we believe this will elevate the local Asian food scene to new heights.
Our food happens to be Chinese, but it is without exception food to be enjoyed by all. I mean, in both our team and our customer base, we strive to include people from all walks of life.
It is what brings us together and fuels the people that make the world of today and tomorrow stronger, better, and more united.
My name is Brandon.
Amber,
How?
Hans,
Andy,
Tunji,
and we're
are
Stein Boys.
All right. Let me stop this. Okay, guys. I hope you guys can hear a little bit about our story in the video. So I'm gonna get right to it. Beef noodle soup. I think there's for all the culinary students out there, there's so many ways that we we could do this. And personally, for myself, this is one of my biggest passions is cooking. But I'm a restaurateur now, and occasionally I would go into one of my restaurants and I would make beef noodle soup. And so part of the process that I use, which is probably the most common method, is the Chinese 5-spice. So Chinese 5-spice, you have star anise, clove, Szechuan pepper, fennel seeds, cinnamon, and there is a couple other variations of Chinese 5-spice that we have incorporated into beef noodle soup. And there's a couple of different ingredients that we use for Stein Boys. One of them being we replace the fennel seeds with cardamom, and we also use bay leaves. The reason we do that, the reason we do a slight variation, it's because I live in Tennessee, and sometimes you can't get a lot of the true ingredients unless you're shipping from overseas. So we had to locally source a lot of the stuff. So we kind of just made our own version of a Chinese 5-spice beef noodle soup. But a lot of these ingredients I listed, they're easily available. You have to, depending on what state you live in, sometimes you have to go into like a local Asian market. Luckily, we have the system all set up. So and we are feeding Nashville every day with beef noodle soup. I'm not gonna get into the making of the noodles today, because while it's a very important process, I'll just break it down to two parts. One part is the noodle, the making of the noodles, which requires years of technique to do, years of learning, under the right apprenticeship with the right chef in certain regions in China. And I think I can just kind of briefly describe, when and this is more culinary in sense, like, you put appropriate amount of potassium carbonate, you dissolve in water with flour. So the salt and the alkaline will kind of like stimulate the protein in the flour. And then you make a small chunks of dough once you mix the flour with water. So after the dough somehow expands, you would start kneading the dough. And then you would knead the dough for a period of time to where it will come to a springiness form, very elastic. So you stretch it, right? So that's how you make the noodles. That's how ancient Chinese times, many people have, and they don't have restaurants back then, so they would make these noodles by hand, So you pull on the dough, and you pull it 9 times, it'll become 256 strips. The math always checks out. The noodles will end up somehow between 0.3 to 0.5 in millimeter in diameter. Okay, I'm not gonna demonstrate the noodle making, but you can look for it in YouTube if you ever have the time. And it's really cool thing. It's very fascinating. That was one of the things I was fascinated by in China that I really wanted to bring to Nashville, but there just wasn't enough time to do that. But I will make it a goal of mine to do that in the future. So that's the noodle part. Now we're gonna be talking about, I'm gonna talk about the soup. So I think I mentioned making the noodle requires a lot of technique and skills. My perception of making the soup, it has a lot to do with patience. It's the timing and it's the dedication it takes to make a soup taste great. So there is a concept, I think, Eric touched on a lot about histories of the Chinese cuisine, which I think there is a concept out there called the perpetual stew concept. So it's basically an ancient cooking method, right? It's known in some cultures. For example, I think it goes all the way back to medieval times, 14th century Poland, even, when they had this thing called the hunter stew. And the principle is very simple. It means the longer you cook the broth, the tastier it becomes. So you basically simmer the broth for forever, I think. If you guys can look it up, there's a restaurant in Thailand. They have kept the same broth for about 45 or to 50 years, I think. So that's one of the things that's very fascinating to me, is because it's the food is so interesting. It has a lot to do with history and the way we we bring people together. So definitely I think that's something to remember. The way you simmer the soup will allow it to allow the deep, rich flavors to penetrate the dish, right? So the way we do it is that we make the soup seasoning, and we will let me just show you the video of the soup. Jason, do you have the video of the beef noodle soup?
So apologies, I think it's maybe not gonna work out right now, but we'll make sure to share it with everyone after if that works with you.
Okay, yeah,
Oh,
sure.
Brendan, do you have it to share?
I gotta find it. I don't think I have it right
Oh,
here.
okay.
Yeah.
So, okay.
But yeah, no, the video of the soup will be, you know, it's like we have a beef noodle soup, so definitely you put the beef in the pot and you kind of simmer it for about 3 hours. The reason why it takes a long time is because it takes a few hours for the beef fiber to loosen, you know, and in order for the beef fiber to loosen, that opens up the flavor, you know, and that's one of the reasons we pick beef, because beef has typically one of the strongest flavors out of all the other meats, you know. It's a very rich aroma. So if the process is done right, a variety of complex aroma are all magnified into this pot of soup.
Brandon, is there a cut of beef or types of beef that you use
Yes.
in your beef noodle soup?
Thanks, Eric. It's beef shank.
Yum.
Yeah, beef shank. That's very it's one of the more tender side of the beef, you know.
After you cook it.
How often do I cook it?
No, you said it's most tender, and I said after you cook it.
Yeah. You're right. Yeah.
It goes from, you know, like a shoe leather to awesome.
You again, I keep having to make this point, but I think, you know, one of the most important part about cooking to me is time, and patience. So I think it all relates together. So, you know, for most Chinese people, the soup is like the heart and soul of the dish, you know. So you know, they can tell. I mean, everybody can tell if a soup tastes good or not, but for the beef noodle soup, you definitely want to cook it for a long time. And it's also being used in other cultures such as Vietnamese noodle soup, which you guys, I'm sure they have a lot of pho restaurants all over the U.S. Before I brought this concept to U.S., a lot of the common place to get noodles were Vietnamese pho and Japanese ramen. So there's a lot of how do I say this? There's a lot of dishes that hasn't been explored in the U.S. You know, a lot of the dishes in the past have always been Japanese ramen and Vietnamese pho, and so Steam Boys is a fairly new concept, and it's and we're looking to expand that to different places all across the U.S.
Mala beef soup coming up soon.
So yes, so mala, the numbing spice. We have funny story. That was one of the you know, great dishes. Like that was one of the things I wanted to expand on the U.S. And what I found out is that, you know, I started the concept in Tennessee, and a lot of people aren't used to the mala spice. You know, not everybody is able to accept it, you know, with their palates. So but we did anyway, and oh man, it's it's yeah, it gets pretty wild, you know. We had people just couldn't stop coughing sometimes, you know, and yeah, we like to turn it up, you know.
It seems like there would be a connection. Like I mentioned Nashville hot chicken previously, kind of as a joke, but it seems like there would be kind of a connection of Nashville hot chicken to mala and the fact that
yeah,
they're
no,
both so
mala.
spicy.
Yeah. So to my knowledge, right, once you you have to really combine a lot of different spices together to create that unique spice. So it's not just, you know, one spice. So I would, I don't know the people over in Prince's or in Pepper Fire or like the hot chicken places, but I would assume that they have some type of ingredients that are all similar to. In fact, we probably share some of the same family ingredients for the spices. You know, spices.
Sounds like it's time for a pop-up. Fried chicken bao and
Oh yeah, yeah.
Nashville hot noodle soup.
That would kill it.
Yeah.
Yeah, no.
Since we're not able to show the video at this time while Hans is trying that, let's do one of the
Hans
questions.
has it. Look, looks like Hans has it.
I do
Oh,
have
okay.
it. Yeah, I can play that for you now if that's okay.
All
Yeah,
right.
I can play it. Yeah, without the sound, best I could. Yeah, so guys, beef shank noodle soup, one of my favorite dishes in China. As you can see, the noodles are they're not really handmade; they're machine made because it would. Oh man, like we would not, to be able to support all the restaurants we have, you know, we have to. It would just be really difficult to do that. But the process we're able to adopt is it's almost the same. And as you can see, the beef broth, that's the broth that we've simmered for a really long time, and we do this every day. You know, it's very important to filter the soup. A lot of the restaurants don't know about this, so the secret's out, guys. Basically, what it means is you have to remove all the impurities after brewing the soup for so long, and so the broth has to be kind of clear in a way, but the color comes from all the different spices, right? So you have the color, but the broth should be clear. It shouldn't be greasy or oily or something. And sometimes you have to filter it for 3 or 4 times, you know, to really achieve that flavor. So food is as much of a science as it is. I think it's all science, you know, to be honest. For me, I just have a passion of cooking. I love to cook, you know, and I love the fact that when you know, when somebody, like when I open a restaurant at a certain region with all the Steam boys, a lot of the customers, they come in, they're eating this for the first time. They've never had this before, you know, in rural areas in Tennessee or other places. And I love just looking at their eyes rolling back in their heads, and they're just in a state of euphoria. That's what keeps me going, man. That's what I love about the hospitality industry, of introducing this Chinese culture for the first time to complete strangers that we've otherwise would have never had this unless they travel thousands of miles away to China. But not everybody gets to have the opportunity to do that, you know, and that's what drives us, our Steam boys, is that we get to do that. So yeah, guys, I think I've explained most about the beef noodle soup. And that's just one of the dishes that we have. There's other dishes that you can look it up on our website, such as the handmade baos, the dumplings, handmade dumplings, and we also have some rice dishes in a couple of other locations. So yeah, there you have it, guys. Steam boys.
Thank you, Brandon, and thank you, Eric, for the presentation. So we'll move into the Q&A section of this program. And I will ask 2 questions, but we'll be going back to the chat to see if our students and faculty member have questions. So Eric, while you are traveling and doing research and development role for your job, what can one learn from culture through cuisine or cuisine through culture?
Sure. So, I mean, that's a pretty loaded question because globally there is so much to learn about cuisine through culture. And so I'm going to keep it on the top line of look at ceremonial cuisines. We talked about the banquet cuisines and Kong family feasts in China. But if you look at, green tea ceremony in Japan, you look at, fasting, right? So non-food traditions around religious activities. But if you just look at the top level of regional ceremonial cuisine and flavors and dishes, there's so much to learn. And if you dig deeper, right, even into celebratory, we'll bring it to the United States, but look at celebratory cuisine around some of the different occasions that we have in the US. There's a lot there.
Okay, for Brandon and Hans, knowing your team did extensive research by traveling through China to develop your business concept, for our students in the audience, say something about learning through that travel and creating your business model and meeting people too.
Yeah, so I would say definitely when it comes to traveling and experiencing foods, just being open to the idea that what you already know isn't always everything that you know. Just being able to take some of what you learn, some of the things that you already know and mixing them together. So even for us, like the experience of bao, understanding already how it's made, and then realizing that once we got to China, that the process was just a little bit different. And then taking that process and bringing it back and then just making a few tweaks that even match what people in Nashville are expecting versus what people in New York City might be expecting, and just kind of understanding the demographics as well. I think that's one of the key aspects of traveling and being open when you're learning to expand your menu and such.
Do we have any questions from our audience? Because you can also speak if you want to.
Encourage.
Yes,
Chef
we have a few.
Hotel. Yeah, please.
One in the back first.
For the Stein boys specifically, you guys had discussed almost Americanizing some of the menu items that you guys currently have while still keeping to traditional menu options and menu styles. Was that more so like a challenge when it came to creating the menu, or was working around the American style and the American diet more of a crutch, if I may? Like, was the focus on an American group a struggle?
Yeah, I can answer that for you. I can go ahead and start with that, and Hans, if you want to follow.
I can add it on that too.
That's a great question. Wow, thank you. What is your name?
Nate.
Sir?
Nate.
Nate. Okay, Nate. Yes. So it was very well. Really, we want to do it. That was the goal of ours, to bring authentic, Chinese cuisine, the way that the food that I grew up eating. I grew up in China, and I came here when I was 10. So I remember like vivid memories of great food from my childhood. So to do that, you have to really find the ingredients locally, and there, I've searched every part of the city, made hundreds of calls, and there's just nowhere. It's not even the fact that they don't have it; they have it, but it's not the same. And what I mean by that is this, right? So like there's different regions in China, like for example, like the Yellow River in China lies on the bed of the Guangsu province, and the water with the landscape and the environment makes the flour really like rich in protein. You know, it just so you know, you're not gonna get the same flour. And when we travel to Chongqing, Sichuan, you know, a lot of the mala spices, that's the origin of like the Sichuan peppercorn, right? The Sichuan peppercorn like grows specifically in a certain type of breed, like a family of breeding Sichuan peppercorns that, you know, it just doesn't travel well, and it's only specific to that region. So yeah, I mean, it's that's you're just not gonna get the exact same taste, but we're able to replicate a lot of things nowadays, you know. So it's almost the same. In fact, I would say it's better, just because some of the organic stuff in Tennessee is very fresh, you know. So it's great. I mean, there's a balance. But yeah, Hans, go ahead.
So just to add on what Brandon's saying, it really does come down to sourcing and understanding that flavor palette and trying to replicate it so that it is as authentic as possible. That is the core of it, and the difficulty there.
We try to take what we did was we took the Chinese street food, these vendors, the way they had everything set up, and we try to modernize it. Like we built a whole kitchen that replicates the way it would be served. That's why we introduced I want to say the open kitchen concept that we introduced as Stein Boys is a very clear representation of like the way Chinese street food is being sold, you know, because everything's out in the open, you know. You have the ready, like you prep it as they order, like made to order, basically. So yeah, that's the answer. I hope that answers your question, sir.
That answer was absolutely fantastic. It really did give a good perspective, like just well summarized, well put together.
Yes.
We have another question.
This is for Chef Brandon. What made you want to go into business for yourself, and how did you, team up with your partners to go into business, and what advice would you give to someone that's wanting to go into business for themselves as well?
It's another great question. Well, what is your name, ma'am?
Ronnie.
Okay.
Ron.
Nice to meet you, Ronnie. Sorry. So it's a pretty personal story. I mean, I grew up in the restaurant business. My family was in the restaurant business. My father is a restaurant Mongol in Tennessee, and he sold Americanized Chinese food for years. And like some of the food that Eric has mentioned, General Tso's chicken, and he did it out of survival, to feed the family and to make a better life for his family, which is me. And so, I was very fortunate to grow up in the environment, the hardworking immigrant, with hard work ethic environment. And I went to college at NYU, where I met Hans and my other partners. And so after I graduated, I took a deep look in my soul, in what I was doing. And I felt like something was missing, because as a Nashville native, right, I want to take where well, as a Chinese native who transplanted to Nashville, let me just correct that. I wanted to just, these are the people I grew up here with, and some of them have never had this type of food before, the food that I ate growing up. So, when I was exploring New York City, I was able to, my goal was to bring some of this to Nashville, because I think this type of food is it's very fresh, simple, and it's affordable. It's for everyone. There's no reason why this can't be really available to everybody. So I wanted to do that, and that's why I got all my partners together, and some of them we just kind of figured out by traveling across China, so yeah, so that's where all the possibilities came from. But Hans, if you want to, kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, let me address something that was sent in before the meeting. For Hans and Eric, since you didn't grow up with Brandon while he was 10, what were some of the misconceptions about Chinese food that you discovered?
Well, I would say that for one, realizing that General Tso's is not something that is traditional to China, and then helping other people recognize that there are things that are more Americanized and not necessarily traditional or you would find there, was one of the misconceptions that I came to, particularly having moved to New York City and experiencing some of the foods that are available in Chinatown and in Queens.
Let me just add this. Chinatown and Queens,
Flushing
got some of the best Chinese food in the world. So when we say Queens, Chinatown in New York City, that's to me, that's the Mecca right now.
Flushing, New York is where you find Chinese food.
Chinese food, yeah. Even better, like
real deal.
It's even better than the homeland. They have perfected it. I think this is my personal opinion.
Or Taiwan. There's some pretty awesome Chinese food in Taiwan.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of these steam boy dishes, we have our influence from Taiwan. Anywhere from the food to interior to the design. It's Taiwanese night market. There's a lot of influence there for sure.
That's true. Eric?
And that's the style of buns that you have, right, Brandon? Or Taiwanese buns with a bun and then filling.
So buns. Sorry. So like I didn't even, I don't want to downplay buns. Like bao is like half of our menu, So I didn't mention a lot of bao today, but because it's so deep, it gets into. But we have two type of baos. We have the open bao, and then we have the gua bao. The gua bao is from the Fujian region. Fujian and Taiwan, they're like right next to each other. It's in the southeast province. So Taiwan is an island on the coast of the southeast China Sea, right? So that's where guabao, like you can find a lot of guabao there in Fujian and in Taiwan. So you're right. That's what the bao is from.
Hey, Lulu, can I ask a question? So I grew up in the city of Xi'an, where the terracotta soldiers are, and there's a Muslim alley, right? We had a small neighborhood. We have many mosques over 1,000 years old, and the Sichuan cuisine. But I think in Xi'an we have the biang noodle, the really white noodles. We had the liang pi, lamb stew. Yeah, we had the
yes.
Yeah, 凉皮肉夹馍.
Yes.
But there's I love
it.
Yeah, I didn't be mentioned Eric in one of the 8 major cuisines. It was because there are just too many. You couldn't fit in 8. But Shia, the Muslim, that was just hard to classify.
There are so many, thousands of cuisines. Yeah, there's just, each each cuisine itself is it gets very deep. I mean, you're talking about thousands of years of history, you know? So
Well, and even to add into Mongolian cuisine, like we're only talking about the East, well, it says Central Asia or Central China. It's really just that carved area. You know, once you go to the mountainous in the West, the cuisine changes even more so. And then, you know, the influence on dumplings, right? So dumplings on Polish cuisine and Russian cuisine. Um, you know,
yes,
so you have your pierogi, which
yes,
different, a little bit of different in meat, a little bit of different in sauce, and it's the same dumpling, right? Chinese actually invented pasta, and so we think of Italian pasta, and so this influence of Chinese noodles and dumplings and wrapped dough really, you know, across the world into a lot of the cuisines we know now.
Well, this is a very hot take, right?
Like I said, we're talking about 5,000 years of culture in 1 hour.
I would say, now I don't, you know, I mean, you know, this is just, nobody knows this, right? But I would say the origin would even comes from like India, even, you know, with the naan bread, you know, the flour and the noodles. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, but that's a conspiracy theories. Like, I don't know.
So like scallion pancakes really came out of naan, bullet naan.
Yeah, you know, but you know, our people like nobody would agree to that. It's just not, you know, yeah, we're proud, you know.
Do we have any more questions from our students?
I have 3 more coming.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Okay,
Go ahead.
First one here is from Alex.
Hi there. I'd like to ask you what an unexpected challenge you grappled with was when you were setting up Steam Boys.
Gosh, you know, there's a lot. I mean, yeah, we definitely, it was probably the hardest period of my life, one of the most rewarding and hardest period. And it's not just for me. I mean, I have 8 partners, and Hans one of them, and he, you know, he has also personally endured. We just, there's just so much to talk, I mean, to list out. It's you know, you got staffing issues, you have, you know, people are well, okay, one of the biggest problems, and I'm only gonna talk about this one, and is the haters, man. There's a lot of haters out there. They don't want this to happen. Like, before we opened, people are like criticizing us. Like, you know, I'm catching, you know, a lot of the bad press from the authentic, you know, side of things, and then I'm also catching a lot of the, you know, oppositions from people are like, oh, we don't need to bring this here, you know, this is not, you know, we don't want this, you know, and I mean, COVID happened, you know, in the midst of us building like 2 restaurants. It's a lot of stuff coming from all sides. But you know what, we persevered, and we stuck it through, and we're gonna continue to do more. But Hans, if you want to talk about a lot more struggle, I know there's a lot that we didn't even get off our chest.
It really varies, but I'd say for us, and probably for anyone in general, especially over the last 3 years, sourcing and staffing has been a major issue, and figuring out ways to be innovative with that. Unfortunately, the old ways of doing recruiting and the old ways of finding sourcing don't work. We have had to diversify the places that we source our core ingredients, and we've also had to diversify the way that we reach out to potential applicants, how we recruit, the way that we utilize technology versus the old way of submitting a paper form or just submitting an online application. You know, there are different ways, especially for those of you that are planning on opening brick and mortar restaurants or working in those, that you're going to have to consider if you want to be able to thrive and succeed.
Hans, how's your equipment package right now?
How's our
opening new-
recruitment package?
Yeah, for opening new restaurants.
It's robust and we're adding more to it. I think it's really more about how we can reach people and what their needs are. You know, we are still people focused when it comes to recruitment, and we are very aware that there are things that most restaurants don't offer that we offer.
I was referring to ovens and fryers being
Our
over a year and a half.
package.
Oh,
Yeah.
recruitment. Yeah,
Oh,
I heard
said-
recruitment too.
I heard recruitment
That's
package.
that's what we care about.
Equipment.
Yeah, our equipment, I would say, Brandon, we've replaced it like what 3-4 times just to make improvements. And
Man,
that's
it's
primarily because
I'm-
we've had to create our entire
Yeah,
kitchen from
I
scratch.
have a whole team that's constantly making calls, you know, to a lot of different places, just sourcing. So yeah, like, but you know, most of our equipment is custom made. So
Yeah.
like, there's just no way to, you just gotta plan it. You know, there's just no way to get it around here. I mean, I'm talking about big steamers, like not just, you know, not just like those home steamers. Like every time I make an equipment run, I get to travel to other places. So, you know, that's fun, you know.
Yeah. And I think to add to what Brandon said, I think one of the things to consider too is the need for people who are also in the engineering field or, you know, have other aspects of capabilities, because like he said, for us, you know, we have to get custom equipment. So if you're doing something that's particularly unique, you're going to have to consider who can create that for you as well.
Yeah, we get like big shipping containers, sometimes internationally from China, you know.
So do we have another question from another student?
Yes, our next question is from Emily.
Yeah, this kind of goes off of what Hans was talking about. So, and it's two parts. How do you guys translate your values around authenticity and your passion for quality into your staffing? Right. So how does that show up in your training? And then also in what ways you talked about modernizing the practice of making the products that you have in your restaurants, but in what ways are you maybe modernizing how you treat your staff? Because I know there's been a huge transformation in the food industry. You know, people are realizing what they will and will not tolerate, and I think the food industry has a history of exploiting its working people. So I'm just wondering in what ways you guys are modernizing that.
Okay, that's an extremely good question. I appreciate you asking that. What was your name again?
Emily.
Emily. Okay, thank you, Emily. So to answer the first part in terms of training, part of it is that if you worked or gone into a lot of different restaurants, and I've been in far too many for my mental health, but there's a lot that happens where there's no training. Most people get thrown in and they're like, figure it out. That's not ideal or conducive to anyone sticking around, but also developing the appropriate skills. And so what we do is when we have people that come in, whether they're working as our front of house or servers or our back of house kitchen employees, there is a stringent process in place to make sure that they, one, learn what it is they're doing and why it matters. If you're just doing something, you don't know why it matters, it's not going to compound. You're not going to develop any additional skills. And one of the other aspects that comes with the training and modernizing is that we do give our staff leeway on giving feedback and having open communication on how we can improve what we're already doing. So I think it's also beneficial to see it as a two-way street. You know, we may have gotten all the recipes and developed them and made them better, but at the end of the day, there are still other people that can contribute to that continuing development. It's not just a one thing and that's it. It's a continuously growing business, and it's also continuously growing food. So I believe that should answer that question, unless there's another aspect you're interested in. And Brandon, feel free to add on to that.
Well, actually, I would like to have Eric say something about a larger corporation. I'm sure your staffing training is a little bit different at churches, right?
Yeah, so our training is different at churches, and then domestically training is different than international. You know, globally, there's just so many variables in the types of employees, honestly, and also types of restaurants, right? So Well, Church's is fast food, what we say QSR in the United States, right? Drive-throughs and takeaway. Some of our markets don't have drive-throughs and they're more sit-down restaurants. And so there's different types of employees that work in those different areas. Our global training program, we have something called PTU. And so it's computer-based. So, I mean, there's 5 people on our training team that develop computer-based training programs and modules. And, you know, so store employees have maybe a 2-month training where they work all the stations, and then you get into regional trainers and store trainers and regional trainers. So the program is pretty in depth if you talk about global training.
Anything to add, Brandon or Hans?
Oh, he's essentially covered the same basics. Yeah.
So we're at 4:26, and what we would like to do is go into our last comments. So,
you know, I want to say one more thing about the training.
Okay.
Just as a global statement, and I think Brandon and Hans will agree with me on this, because they talk about how they have to approach even hiring differently. But a term that's been more widely used in the past 2 years about training is the term gamify, right? So you gamify your training to encourage participation by your employees, right? And so rewards, medals, scoring, things that make it competitive, right? You gamify your training really to entice people to participate.
Yeah, that is well said.
Oh, there's one more question.
Okay.
Okay, Bailey.
Okay. So what is, and this can be for anybody, what is the most interesting technique you've seen in cooking for Chinese cuisine?
Can you repeat the question?
Yes.
Yeah.
What is the most interesting cooking technique in Chinese cuisine? And this can be for anyone that you've found.
Well, I've eaten many different types of Chinese food over the years, growing up. One thing I think is really cool that I think it's like I think there's a dish that I think Eric might have mentioned earlier. It was something about, and you know, Eric, maybe you can add a little bit more to that. You know, they cook it on the ground. What is that called? The chicken? What is that?
The beggar's chicken, where they cook
beggar's
it submerged,
chicken. Yeah. So I think that's so interesting because wait, but Eric, do you know like how they start, like how they cook it?
I think it's similar to even just like Cuban pork, right? How you bury it in the sand.
Yeah,
or
like you
clam
bury
bake.
it,
Right, you
right?
bury it, and then it's cooked from the top.
Well, I mean, but where would you, like, where's the heat coming from?
It comes from the top, right? So you
Like a
bury it.
fireplace?
So coals, ashes, burned wood.
Okay.
Mhm.
Right. Coal cooking. Yes. Yeah. So coal cooking is not done, not as common anymore. I think in like who's doing coals now? Like I don't think anybody really, even in the US, right?
So ask those barbecue pitmasters.
Oh yeah. Okay, so you're right.
That'd be-
No, I'm thinking like the way they do it is you know, they bury it underground. I think that's so cool because I've seen this cooking where people put on like a mask, right? Like an actual gas mask. I think it's in Taiwan. I'm not sure. Forget, but the air is not healthy for humans, right? But he puts on this mask and he goes in, he cooks this food under like buried deep somewhere, and it's, you know, and he talks about like you how something so terrible in the air could create something so beautiful. So to me, that's an interesting concept. But yeah, that's that. I hope that answers your question.
We're at 4:30. Ming, do you have anything to say before we close?
I just want to say that thank you to our teachers and students from Institute of Culinary, Iowa Institute of Culinary Art, and I think thank you, Brendan, have shared interesting adventure and into this food business. I didn't have time to ask them because I was going to ask what was the original major of your 8 partners. But actually, if we have time, I was going to ask them. But Eric, the overview, I just think it's such a wonderful first episode. But I want to tell the teacher students that we do plan to do more of this. So if you have an interest, definitely, like your teachers know, we'll let them know when the other episodes are produced. But thank you so much for your time. But Lulu, do I have time to ask Brendan and Hans what was the original major of the 8 partners?
Yeah, let's do that because I think it might be another lesson for our students too.
So
yeah,
you don't have to name names.
Yeah, let me see.
Go ahead.
So we can start with ourselves.
Yeah.
So my majors were applied psychology, business psychology, and a focus in human behavior through sociology, with a subsection of interest in photography. So that's like 4 different things. That's just me.
Wow.
Hey,
Wow, that boils down to
Think about Columbia.
Oh yeah,
that's a whole nother.
Yeah, and then I also hold a master's degree in process improvement. So yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
How about Brendan?
Yeah, I did media and communications at NYU with Hans. I think we're under like the same umbrella of school.
Yeah, Stein.
Steinhardt, and I just have a bachelor's, but Hans here has a master's from Columbia University.
Let's see, we've got
NYU and Columbia. Yeah. So
yeah. And you wanted to know about our
so we have our team, like we have a doctor actually in the team. His name is Andy Lay. He's a Vietnamese American doctor, and he graduated from Harry Medical School. So he is no longer, he's a full-time partner in this. He's not pursuing the medical field anymore, but he did finish. And then we have another TSU native, Tennessee State University. He is a accounting major. He's a Chinese native as well, and he has I think he has a photographic memory of accounting. So I mean that's a good person to have on the team. His name is Tao. He went to TSU. And who else are we missing here? Tao, Andy, Mike. Right?
Mike. Yeah, Mike.
I'm not sure where Mike went to college.
I'm not sure as well.
WKU, Western Kentucky, I think.
To Western Kentucky, and then
he did marketing. He's our marketing guru. Yeah. So it's very diverse. We have a very diverse team that came together, and just an unlikely series of events brought us together. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think the messaging is there. The title "Eat, Drink, and Prosper Together" is meant to for us to appreciate diversity and learn from each other and grow. Apparently, we are doing that here, and you have already done that. So, with that, unless we have anything else, we hope y'all come back for our segment 2.
Okay. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you.